My boyfriend's parents said I needed to see the baby's room and then locked me inside of it. I was 3 months pregnant and finally meeting his family for the first time. They lived 4 hours away, which is why it took so long to coordinate. When I arrived, his mom opened the door before I even knocked and immediately put her hands on my stomach without asking. "Oh my goodness, there's our grandbaby." His dad guided me inside like I might break. They sat me in a specific armchair and his mom brought water and snacks. "Are you taking your vitamins? What has your doctor said about your iron levels?" I tried to answer, but she kept firing off more questions. His dad seemed irritated when I mentioned I'd only had 2 appointments so far. 2? You should be going every week. My boyfriend just sat there nodding like this was normal. During dinner, his mom watched every bite I took and piled more food onto my plate even when I said I was full. His dad asked invasive questions about my family's medical history that felt way too personal for a first meeting. After dinner, his mom clapped her hands together. "We have something special to show you. We've prepared the perfect room for you and the baby." They led me to a door I thought was a closet. It opened to stairs going down to the basement. I followed, expecting a cute nursery. Instead, there was a single bed, a mini fridge, a small bathroom, and one tiny window near the ceiling with bars on it. Medical equipment sat next to the bed, including a fetal heart monitor and an IV stand. His mom gestured around proudly. "This is where you'll stay for the rest of your pregnancy. We can monitor you properly here." I laughed. Nobody laughed back. "I'm not staying in your basement. I have a job and an apartment." His dad stepped between me and the stairs. "Your job has been notified you're taking medical leave. We had your boyfriend call them yesterday." I looked at my boyfriend. He was staring at the floor. "They just want to help. You've been so stressed." I tried to push past his dad, but he grabbed my shoulders. His mom was saying stress hormones were bad for the baby. They physically pushed me back into the room, and I fell onto the bed. The door had a heavy lock on the outside. The walls were padded. A camera was mounted in the corner. This wasn't a room. It was a cell. His mom showed me rows of pre-made meals in the fridge. "We did this with your boyfriend's brother and his wife 5 years ago. She fought it first, too. Their baby was born completely healthy." They backed toward the stairs. His mom blew me a kiss. "Get some rest, sweetheart." The door closed. The lock slid into place. I sat on that bed shaking for what felt like hours. Then I stopped crying and started thinking. The camera had a small red light. I noticed it flickered every few minutes, probably recording in intervals to save storage. I timed it. 12 seconds off, then back on. The window was too small to climb through, but it wasn't sealed, just locked from outside with a simple latch I could see through the glass. The mini fridge was heavy. Heavy enough. I waited until 3 a.m. when the house above me had been silent for hours. When the camera light flickered off, I dragged the mini fridge beneath the window, climbed on top, and slammed my elbow into the glass. It shattered on the second hit. I reached through, flipped the latch, and squeezed my body through that tiny opening. The bars were decorative, not structural. They popped off when I kicked them. I fell into their backyard covered in broken glass and blood, my hands and arms torn up. I didn't care. I ran. A gas station 2 miles down the road. The cashier took one look at me, pregnant and bleeding, and called 911 before I even asked. The police found everything. The basement, the camera footage, the medical equipment. His parents were arrested that night. My boyfriend, too. During the investigation, I learned his brother's wife had been held for 7 months. She never reported it because they convinced her she was crazy. She'd had 2 more children since then, and they tried to take her again with each pregnancy. She finally told the truth when detectives showed up at her door. "I'm 6 months pregnant now, living with my sister 3 states away. The baby is healthy. I'm healing. Sometimes I think about how close I came to staying in that basement until I gave birth, how they would have taken my baby and called me unstable, how I almost became another woman too scared to tell anyone what happened. But I got out, and I'm telling everyone." My phone rang at 7 in the morning, 3 days after I posted my story online. I was sitting in Raina's kitchen feeding myself breakfast because my hands still shook when I tried to do normal things. The caller ID said Detective Clark. I answered on the second ring, and he didn't waste time with small talk. 3 more women had contacted the police after reading my story. 3 women with stories about the Mackenzie family that went back 15 years. The pattern was bigger than anyone thought. The charges against them were being expanded. I sat there with my spoon halfway to my mouth while he explained that each woman described similar basements, similar monitoring equipment, similar phrases about stress hormones. The oldest case was from 1998. 15 years of this happening and nobody knew. My cereal got soggy while he talked. When I hung up, Raina asked if I was okay. I told her I didn't know how to feel. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that this was real and documented. Horror that it happened to so many others. Anger that it took this long for anyone to stop them. The prosecutor called that afternoon. Bianca Perry introduced herself and said she needed to meet with me and Alana together. She wanted to coordinate our testimonies and prepare us for what was coming. She offered to drive out to Raina's apartment because I wasn't ready to go to the courthouse yet. The thought of walking into a government building made my chest tight. We scheduled it for 2 days later. Raina cleared her schedule without me asking. She'd been doing that a lot, rearranging her entire life around my needs. I felt guilty, but she insisted it was what sisters did. Bianca arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that looked expensive. She shook my hand gently when she noticed the healing cuts on my palms. Alana showed up 10 minutes later looking nervous. We sat around Raina's dining table with coffee and legal pads. Bianca started by explaining the charges, the timeline, what would happen next. Then she asked us to walk through our experiences step by step. Alana went first. She described being led to the basement 5 years ago, the same basement I'd been in. The same bed, same mini fridge, same tiny window. When she got to the part about Lynette saying stress hormones were bad for the baby, I interrupted. Those were the exact words Lynette used on me, word for word. Alana stared at me. We started comparing details. The speech about monitoring properly, the dismissal of our jobs as unimportant, the insistence that they knew better than doctors. Every single phrase matched. Bianca wrote everything down and said this proved premeditation and planning. It made the charges more serious. They had a script. They'd been using the same script for 15 years. My obstetrician appointment was the next morning. Raina drove because I still didn't trust myself behind a wheel. My mind wandered too much. The doctor did an ultrasound and checked all the measurements. The baby was healthy despite everything I'd gone through. Strong heartbeat, good growth, moving around normally. But she wanted to see me weekly now because of the stress and physical trauma. She worried about my blood pressure and my sleep. I told her I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. She prescribed something safe for pregnancy and said I needed to take care of myself for the baby's sake. Raina took notes because I had trouble focusing. My brain felt foggy most of the time. Simple information wouldn't stick. I'd forget what day it was or what I'd eaten for breakfast. The doctor said that was normal after trauma, but it frustrated me. Bianca called while we were driving home from the appointment. The defense attorney had contacted her trying to negotiate a plea deal. He claimed the Mackenzies were elderly and were trying to help in a misguided way. They meant well, but didn't understand modern parenting. Bianca's voice was sharp when she told me this. She said she was rejecting any deal that didn't include serious prison time. She wanted me to know immediately because she didn't want me worrying they'd get off easy. I thanked her and hung up. Raina asked what happened. I told her and she gripped the steering wheel harder. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. Ryan Shepard showed up at the apartment that afternoon. He was my victim advocate, assigned by the court to help me through the process. He had kind eyes and a gentle voice that made me feel slightly less anxious. He helped me apply for emergency financial assistance and explained all my legal rights. I had to ask the same questions multiple times because my anxiety made it hard to retain information. What happens at the hearing? What do I have to testify about? Can they force me to see them? Ryan answered each question patiently every single time I asked. He never made me feel stupid for forgetting. He gave me his card and said I could call anytime, even in the middle of the night if I needed to. Raina made him coffee and thanked him for being patient with me. Alana called me that evening. Her voice sounded different, stronger somehow. She told me she was divorcing Jasper. He knew what his parents did to her and never stopped them or got her help. He watched them take her to that basement 3 times and did nothing. She'd been living in a shelter with her 3 kids but was determined to start over completely. She asked if I knew any apartments near me. She wanted to be close to someone who understood what she'd survived. I told her I'd help her look. Raina overheard and immediately pulled up rental listings on her laptop. We spent the next 2 days calling places and viewing apartments. Raina drove us around while I sat in the back with Alana's youngest kid on my lap. We found a small 2-bedroom place 3 blocks from Raina's apartment. It was cheap and needed work, but Alana loved it. A domestic violence support organization donated furniture and household items. Raina and I helped her move in. We assembled beds and unpacked boxes and hung curtains. Having her nearby felt like having an ally who truly understood what I survived. Someone who didn't need me to explain why certain sounds made me freeze, or why I checked every door lock 3 times. My therapist introduced me to EMDR therapy the following week. She explained it was for processing trauma through eye movements and bilateral stimulation. It sounded weird, but I was desperate for anything that might help. The first session left me exhausted, but feeling like I released something heavy I'd been carrying. We focused on the moment the basement door locked. the sound of that lock sliding into place. She had me follow her fingers with my eyes while holding on to that memory. My body shook and I cried, but afterward I felt lighter. The work was hard, but I could already tell it was helping. I scheduled weekly sessions. Detective Clark called again 3 days later. They'd found journals in Lynette's possession, notebooks filled with her beliefs about pregnancy and control. She'd documented detailed plans for how to handle difficult mothers. What to say, how to isolate them, how to maintain control. Page after page of calculations and strategies. The evidence showed this was a calculated system, not impulsive actions. She'd been planning this for decades. Some entries dated back to before Tyler was even born. Clark said it was some of the most disturbing evidence he'd seen in 20 years of police work. I asked if I had to read them. He said no, but they'd be used in court. I told him I didn't want to see them. I didn't need to read her thoughts to know what she was capable of. Clark called me the next morning to tell me the gas station cashier wanted to meet. She'd been asking about me through the police department, wanting to know if I was okay. Her name was Janella, and she had a daughter my age. She kept thinking about that night, about me stumbling through her door covered in blood and broken glass. Clark gave me her number, and I called that afternoon. We met at a coffee shop near Raina's apartment 2 days later. Janella hugged me before we even sat down. She kept touching my arm like she needed to make sure I was real and safe. She told me about her daughter who lived across the country now, about how she thought of me that night and couldn't stop picturing her own child in that situation. She said she'd worked at that gas station for 12 years and seen plenty of scary things, but nothing like what I looked like coming through that door. I thanked her for calling 911 so fast, for not asking questions first, for just acting. She cried and said anyone would have done the same, but I knew that wasn't true. Some people would have hesitated or assumed I was drunk or on drugs. She saw a pregnant woman in trouble and got help immediately. We talked for over an hour and exchanged numbers. She made me promise to send her a picture when the baby came. Bianca called me in for another meeting 3 days after that. She sat me down in her office and explained what was coming next. The defense attorneys were building their case, and she needed me to understand their strategy. They were going to paint me as unstable, as someone who misunderstood kind intentions and turned helpful family members into villains. They'd ask about my mental health history, my relationship with Tyler, my family background. They'd try to make the jury think I was dramatic or attention-seeking. Bianca spent the next 4 hours preparing me. She asked me every horrible question she could think of, made me practice staying calm when I wanted to scream. She told me to keep my answers short and factual, to not get defensive or emotional even when the questions felt like attacks. We went over my timeline again and again until I could recite every detail without hesitation. She made me describe the basement room. So many times I could picture every corner in my sleep. By the end, I felt exhausted, but more ready. Raina picked me up and bought me ice cream on the way home. Alana came over the following week with a box of old photos she'd found at her mother's house. We sat on Raina's couch looking through pictures of Tyler's family going back decades. That's when we found it. A photo from the 1980s showing Tyler's grandmother's house. In the background, through a basement window, you could see bars. The exact same kind of bars that had been on my window. Alana went pale. She started shaking and told me about visiting that house as a child, about a locked door in the basement her mother-in-law said was just storage, about how Lynette had lived with her own mother during her pregnancies with Tyler and Jasper. We called Bianca immediately. She came over within an hour and took the photo. She said this changed everything because it proved the pattern went back generations. This wasn't just Lynette and Victor's idea. This was learned behavior passed down through the family. Lynette had been kept in a basement room by her own mother and then recreated that same prison for other women. Bianca said this made the case even stronger and more disturbing. We were the first ones who got out and told people. The first ones who broke the cycle. The deposition happened 2 weeks later in a conference room at the courthouse. Ryan met me outside and walked me in. The defense attorney was a man in his 50s with cold eyes and a fake smile. He asked me to describe my relationship with Tyler from the beginning. Then he started asking about my mental health. Had I ever been depressed? Had I ever seen a therapist before the incident? Did I have anxiety? Was I on any medications? Had anyone in my family ever been diagnosed with mental illness? I kept my answers short like Bianca taught me. Yes, I'd seen a therapist in college for anxiety. No, I wasn't on medication. My grandmother had depression. He asked if I'd ever felt paranoid or had trust issues. If I'd ever misunderstood someone's intentions before. If Tyler had ever complained about me being dramatic or overreacting. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table when I started getting upset. I took a break and went to the bathroom where I cried for 5 minutes. Then I went back in and finished. The attorney asked if I'd provoked the Mackenzies in any way, if I'd been rude or disrespectful, if I'd refused their help before they resorted to keeping me in the basement. I looked him in the eyes and said no. He asked the same question 3 different ways. I gave the same answer every time. The deposition lasted 6 hours. Ryan stayed beside me the whole time, reminding me I could stop whenever I needed to. My next therapy session focused on the scars on my arms and hands. They were healing but still visible, raised pink lines where the glass had cut deepest. I hated looking at them. They reminded me of that night, of the terror and pain. My therapist asked me to describe what I saw when I looked at the scars. I said I saw weakness, saw proof that I'd been hurt and trapped. She asked me to try seeing them differently, to see evidence of my strength instead of marks of what was done to me. She said those scars showed I fought back, that I chose pain and injury over staying trapped, that I was willing to hurt myself to save myself and my baby. She had me trace them with my finger while saying out loud what they represented. I broke through a window. I climbed through broken glass. I ran 2 miles bleeding and pregnant. I survived. It felt stupid at first, but by the end of the session I was crying, and the scars looked different somehow. Less like wounds and more like proof. Raina told me she was taking a leave of absence from her job the next morning over breakfast. I was 7 months pregnant now, and she wanted to be there full-time as my due date got closer. I tried to argue, told her she didn't need to do that I could manage. She said her little sister and future niece or nephew were more important than any job. She'd already talked to her boss and arranged everything. She was taking 12 weeks off starting immediately. I cried and hugged her. She said she wanted to be there for every appointment, every moment I needed support, every scary thing that came up with the case. She wanted to help me set up the nursery corner in her spare room and go to birthing classes and be my person through all of it. I'd never felt more grateful for anyone in my life. Bianca called 2 days later with news that made me sit down hard. 2 more victims had agreed to testify. That brought the total to 4 women willing to go public about what the Mackenzies did to them. 4 separate women with nearly identical stories spanning 15 years. Bianca said the case was now overwhelming. The defense attorneys were getting desperate, calling her multiple times a day trying to negotiate a better plea deal. She said with 4 victims testifying plus all the physical evidence, there was almost no way the Mackenzies wouldn't be convicted on every charge. The attorneys knew it and were scrambling. I asked what would happen next. She said we'd probably get another plea offer soon, one that was slightly better but still not good enough. She wanted all 4 victims to meet and discuss together whether we wanted to take any deal or push for trial. She said we deserved to make that choice as a group. I started going to a support group for pregnant women who'd experienced trauma the following week. My therapist had recommended it months ago, but I hadn't felt ready. Now at 7 months pregnant and dealing with depositions and court preparation, I needed to be around other women who understood. The group met in a church basement every Thursday evening. There were usually 6 to 8 women there at different stages of pregnancy or new motherhood. Some had experienced domestic violence, some had been assaulted, some had medical trauma or loss. We went around the circle sharing whatever we needed to share that week. Hearing other stories made me feel less alone in a way nothing else had. One woman named Jessica had a similar due date to mine. We exchanged numbers after the second meeting and started texting. She sent me encouragement before difficult appointments, and I did the same for her. Having a friend who got it without me having to explain everything helped more than I expected. Tyler's letter arrived in the mail 3 weeks later. Ryan called to warn me it was coming, said I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. I waited until my next therapy session and opened it there with my therapist sitting across from me. The letter was 4 pages long. Tyler said he was sorry, that he'd been brainwashed by his parents his whole life, that he didn't realize how wrong it was until he was sitting in jail. He said he loved me and missed me and wanted a chance to be a father to our baby. He said he was getting therapy in jail and working on himself and hoped I could forgive him someday. I read it once all the way through. Then I folded it up and told my therapist I never wanted to hear from him again. He participated in locking me in a basement. He watched his father grab me and didn't stop it. He knew what his parents did to his sister-in-law and still brought me to their house. Nothing he said in that letter changed any of those facts. I told Bianca to block all future contact. I didn't want his letters or calls or messages through lawyers. I wanted nothing from him ever. The preliminary hearing happened on a cold morning in early November. I had to attend to hear the charges read officially. Bianca met me and Ryan outside the courthouse and walked us through what would happen. The judge would read the charges, the defendants would enter pleas, and bail would be discussed again. It would be quick, maybe 30 minutes total. We went through security and sat in the gallery waiting for the case to be called. Then the side door opened and guards brought the Mackenzies in. They were wearing orange jumpsuits with their hands cuffed in front of them. Lynette looked smaller somehow, older. Victor walked with his head down. Tyler was last, and he looked up at me as he entered. I looked away. The judge read the charges one by one. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy, assault. The list went on and on. Each defendant said not guilty in quiet voices. The defense attorneys argued for bail again. Bianca stood up and reminded the judge that these defendants had imprisoned multiple women over many years and represented a clear danger to the community. The judge denied bail for all three. They'd stay in jail until trial. Watching them be led back out in handcuffs and orange jumpsuits made it real in a way nothing else had. They were actually being held accountable. They were actually in jail for what they did to me and Alana and the others. I cried in the courthouse bathroom afterward while Raina held me. I looked at Lynette across the courtroom and watched her lips move. She was mouthing something at me while her lawyer shuffled papers. I'm sorry. That's what she was trying to say. Her attorney noticed and grabbed her arm, pulling her back into her seat. The judge cleared his throat and started talking about bail again. The defense lawyers stood up and asked if their clients could at least be released on house arrest. They said Lynette and Victor were elderly and not dangerous. Bianca stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She reminded the judge about the basement and the camera and the 4 other women who came forward. She said these people spent decades planning how to trap pregnant women. The judge looked at the Mackenzies for a long time. Then he said no bail for any of them. He called them flight risks and dangers to the community. Guards came and led them back through the side door. Tyler looked at me one more time before he disappeared. I didn't look away this time. I wanted him to see that I wasn't scared anymore. Back at Raina's apartment that night, I sat on the couch with my hand on my stomach. The baby had been kicking all day. Little movements that felt like bubbles popping. I pressed my palm against the spot where I felt her moving. I started talking without really thinking about it. I told her we were going to be okay. I said she was going to have a good life and nobody would ever hurt her. I promised her she'd be safe and loved and free. Raina came out of the kitchen and caught me talking to my belly. She sat down next to me and put her hand right next to mine. She started talking too, telling the baby she was going to be the best aunt ever. She said they'd go to the park and eat ice cream and watch movies. She promised to teach her how to ride a bike and stand up for herself. We sat there together with our hands on my stomach, making promises to someone who wasn't even born yet. Bianca called 2 days later with news. She'd filed more charges against the Mackenzies. The other victims had given statements and each one added new counts. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, conspiracy. The list went on and on. She said if they were found guilty on everything, they'd each be facing over 40 years in prison. I asked what that meant for the trial. She said the defense lawyers were getting nervous. They'd started calling her office multiple times a day asking about plea deals. She told them she wasn't interested unless they were talking about serious prison time. I asked her what serious meant. She said at least 20 years for Lynette and Victor, at least 10 for Tyler. Anything less, and she'd take it to trial. 3 weeks later, Bianca asked me to come to her office. She needed to talk about what came next. I brought Ryan with me because he helped me understand the legal stuff when my brain got foggy. Bianca spread papers across her desk and explained my options. I could accept a plea deal if the defense offered one that made sense. Or I could go to trial. She said trial meant testifying in front of a jury and telling them everything that happened. It meant the defense lawyer would ask me hard questions and try to make me look bad. It meant reporters would be there and people would write about it. But it also meant the Mackenzies would probably get longer sentences. And it meant there'd be a public record of what they did, so everyone would know the truth. I asked her what she thought I should do. She said it was my choice, but she'd support whatever I decided. I told her I needed time to think about it. The next week, Alana called and said Bianca wanted all 4 victims to meet together. I was nervous about it. I'd talked to Alana a lot, but I'd never met the other 2 women. We gathered in a conference room at the prosecutor's office on a Tuesday afternoon. The other women were named Sarah and Michelle. Sarah was in her 30s with 2 kids. Michelle was younger, maybe 25. We sat around the table and looked at each other. Nobody knew what to say at first. Then Sarah started talking about what happened to her. She'd been held for 5 months during her first pregnancy. They'd told her family she was in a special medical facility. When she had the baby, they kept her for another month before finally letting her go home. She'd been too scared to report it because they threatened to take her baby away and say she was crazy. Michelle's story was similar. 4 months in the basement. Threats about losing custody. Being told she was unstable and needed help. I shared my story and Alana shared hers. By the end, we were all crying. But we were also angry. Alana said we weren't just survivors anymore. We were a team. We were going to make sure this never happened to anyone else. We all agreed. Whatever it took, we were doing this together. 2 days after that meeting, a reporter published a huge article about the Mackenzie case. It was in a major newspaper and got picked up by news sites everywhere. The article talked about multi-generational abuse and how families can hide horrible things for decades. It explained how the Mackenzies operated and why nobody caught them sooner. The reporter interviewed experts about control and manipulation. She talked about how pregnant women are especially vulnerable. My name wasn't in the article, but the story went national anyway. I saw it on news websites and social media. People were sharing it and commenting. Most of the comments were supportive. People said they were glad the Mackenzies got caught. Some people shared their own stories about family abuse. Reading those comments made me feel less alone. Detective Clark called me the same day the article came out. He said he had news about Tyler. I almost hung up because I didn't want to hear Tyler's name, but the detective said it was important. Tyler had started cooperating with the prosecutors. He was giving them detailed information about how his parents planned everything. He was telling them about the journals and the equipment and the whole system they'd built. The detective said Tyler's testimony would make the case much stronger. It would be harder for the defense to claim this was all a misunderstanding if their own son was explaining how they did it. I asked if that meant I'd have to see Tyler. The detective said no, I could still refuse all contact. Tyler's cooperation didn't change my rights. I told him I never wanted to talk to Tyler again. The detective said he understood. I was 7 months pregnant now. My belly was huge and the baby kicked constantly. Rena helped me set up a corner of her spare room as a nursery. We bought a crib from a secondhand store and painted it white. I found tiny clothes at a thrift shop, little onesies with animals on them, soft pajamas with feet. I folded them and put them in a drawer. Rena bought a mobile with stars and moons that hung over the crib. We spent an afternoon putting it together and hanging it up. When it was done, we just stood there looking at it. This was real. I was having a baby, she was going to sleep in this crib and wear these clothes, and I was going to be her mom. The legal stuff was still happening and the trial was still coming. But this was happening too. Normal things, baby things. It helped balance everything else. Bianca called again a week later. The defense had made an offer. She sounded mad when she told me what it was. Lynette would serve 15 years. Victor would serve 15 years. Tyler would serve 5 years with probation after. Bianca said it was insulting. She said these people destroyed lives for decades and 15 years wasn't enough. She said 5 years for Tyler was a joke when he'd helped them do it. I asked her what would happen if we said no. She said we'd go to trial. I asked what the other victims thought. She said she was calling all of us to get our opinions before responding to the defense. The next day, all 4 of us met with Bianca again. She laid out the plea offer and explained what it meant. Then she went around the table asking each of us what we wanted to do. Sarah said no. She wanted a trial. She wanted a jury to hear what happened, and she wanted the Mackenzies to get more time than 15 years. Michelle agreed. She said 5 years for Tyler wasn't justice. Alana said she wanted to go to trial too. She'd been quiet for too long and she wanted to speak up now. Then everyone looked at me. I thought about sitting in a courtroom and telling my story in front of strangers. I thought about the defense lawyer asking me questions and trying to make me look bad. I thought about reporters writing about it and people reading about what happened to me. It scared me. But I also thought about the basement and the camera and the way they locked that door. I thought about how they would have kept me there until I had the baby. I thought about the other women they'd hurt and the women they might hurt if they got out in 15 years. I looked at Bianca and said I wanted to go to trial. She smiled and said she'd call the defense attorneys and tell them we were rejecting the offer. We were going to trial and we were going to win. My therapist sat across from me with a pen and notepad. She explained that victim impact statements help judges understand the real effects of crimes. I needed to write about how the Mackenzies hurt me and what I wanted the judge to know. She said I could take as long as I needed. I started writing that night at Raina's kitchen table. The baby was kicking and I kept one hand on my stomach while I wrote with the other. I described the moment I realized the basement wasn't a nursery. I wrote about breaking the window and running bleeding through their backyard. I included how I still woke up some nights thinking I was locked in that room. The hardest part was writing about the baby and how close I came to losing her. I finished it over 3 days and read it to my therapist. She said it was powerful and honest. Writing it made me cry, but it also made me feel stronger. I had control over my own story now. Jury selection started 2 weeks later. Bianca said I didn't have to attend, but I wanted to see it. The courthouse had metal detectors and security guards everywhere. Ryan met me at the entrance and walked me to the courtroom. Potential jurors filled the benches, and the judge explained what the case involved. He read the basic charges without going into detail: false imprisonment, kidnapping, assault, conspiracy. I watched the faces of people in the jury pool. Some looked shocked when they heard pregnant woman held in basement. Others looked angry. A few seemed uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be part of this. The lawyers asked questions about whether people could be fair. One woman said she had a daughter my age and wasn't sure she could stay neutral. The judge excused her. Another man said he didn't believe families could be that cruel. The prosecutor asked him more questions, and he admitted he might not believe the victims. He got excused too. By the end of the first day, they'd selected 8 jurors. I left feeling like most normal people understood this was horrible. That helped. Raina surprised me the next weekend with a baby shower. She'd invited women from my support group and some of her coworkers who I'd met. We gathered in her living room with pink decorations everywhere. Someone brought a cake shaped like a baby bottle. Another person gave me a diaper bag filled with supplies. The women from my support group pooled money to buy a car seat. I opened presents and felt normal for the first time in months. We played silly games and laughed. For 3 hours, I wasn't a victim or a witness. I was just a pregnant woman celebrating her daughter. One of Raina's friends asked if I'd picked a name yet. I said I was still deciding, but I liked names that meant something hopeful. Everyone started suggesting names. Hope, Joy, Dawn, Grace, Faith. I wrote them all down. When everyone left, Raina and I sat surrounded by baby gifts. She said she was proud of me. I told her I couldn't have survived any of this without her. The trial started on a Monday morning in late October. I sat in the front row with Ryan beside me. The Mackenzies were let in wearing street clothes instead of jail uniforms. Lynette looked smaller than I remembered. Victor stared straight ahead. Tyler wouldn't look at anyone. The judge called the court to order and Bianca stood to give her opening statement. She walked the jury through everything. The basement room, the camera system, the medical equipment, the pattern going back to Lynette's own mother. She explained how 4 different women over 15 years had the same experience. She showed the jury a photo of the basement and several of them leaned forward to see it better. One woman covered her mouth. A man shook his head. Bianca's voice stayed calm and clear as she described what the Mackenzies did. She said the evidence would prove they planned and executed a system of imprisonment and control. She said they treated pregnant women like property instead of people. When she finished, I felt hopeful. The jury looked upset, and that meant they understood. Detective Clark testified the next day. He walked the jury through the night he responded to the gas station. He described finding me bleeding and pregnant. Then he explained what they discovered at the Mackenzie house. The locked basement door, the padded walls, the camera mounted in the corner, the medical equipment lined up next to the bed. He showed photos to the jury. I watched their faces as they looked at pictures of that room. Several jurors glanced at the Mackenzies with disgust. The detective explained how the camera system worked and how it saved footage to a hard drive. He testified about finding meal prep containers in the fridge and prenatal vitamins lined up on a shelf. The defense attorney tried to suggest the room could have been for legitimate medical monitoring. Detective Clark said no legitimate medical setup includes locked doors and hidden cameras. The jury nodded. The gas station cashier testified after lunch. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She described how I stumbled through the door covered in blood. She said I was shaking and could barely speak. She called 911 immediately and stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. The prosecutor asked what condition I appeared to be in. The cashier's voice broke when she answered. She said I looked terrified and hurt and very pregnant. She said she has a daughter about my age and kept thinking about what if this happened to her child. She started crying on the stand. The judge gave her a tissue. The defense attorney asked if I seemed confused or disoriented. The cashier said no. She said I was clear about what happened and where I'd escaped from. She said I kept saying they locked me in the basement. The jury was watching her closely. I was grateful she was willing to help. After she finished, Bianca told me I'd testify the next day. I took the stand on Wednesday morning. Bianca guided me through my testimony step by step. I described meeting Tyler's parents for the first time, the invasive questions, the way his mom touched my stomach without asking, the dinner where they watched everything I ate. I walked the jury through going down to the basement and seeing that room. I explained how I laughed because I thought it was a joke, how his dad blocked the stairs, how they pushed me back when I tried to leave. I described the lock and the camera and the medical equipment. I told them about timing the camera's recording pattern, about dragging the mini fridge to the window, about breaking the glass with my elbow. I showed the jury the scars on my arms. Bianca asked how I felt when the door locked. I said I felt trapped and scared and like I might never get out. The testimony took 3 hours that first day. Ryan sat in the front row the whole time. When we broke for lunch, I was exhausted. The next day, I'd face cross-examination. The defense attorney started questioning me Thursday morning. He tried to make it sound like I misunderstood the situation. He asked if the Mackenzies ever explicitly said I couldn't leave. I said they locked the door from the outside. He asked if I tried talking to them reasonably. I said I tried to leave and they physically stopped me. He suggested maybe they were just very concerned about the baby's health. I said concerned people don't lock pregnant women in basements. He asked if I had any history of anxiety or mental health issues. Bianca objected and the judge sustained it. He tried asking if Tyler and I had been fighting before I met his parents. I said no. He asked if I'd ever expressed concerns about being able to care for a baby. I said every first-time parent has concerns, but that doesn't justify imprisonment. He kept trying different angles. Was I sure they meant to keep me there permanently? Was I certain I couldn't have just asked to leave? Did I consider that they might have released me eventually? I stayed calm and stuck to the facts. The door was locked. The walls were padded. There was a camera. I had to break a window to escape. The jury wasn't buying his narrative. I could see it in their faces. They believed me. Alana testified on Friday. She walked the jury through her 7 months in that basement. She described how the Mackenzies brought her meals 3 times a day. How Lynette monitored her constantly. How they told her the stress of the outside world was bad for the baby. She explained that when she tried to resist, they convinced her she was having mental problems. They said pregnancy hormones were making her unstable. They said she needed to trust them. She testified that after the baby was born, they let her out, but made her sign papers saying she'd been staying with them voluntarily. She was so broken down by then that she signed. When she got pregnant again 2 years later, they tried to take her back to the basement. She fought harder that time, but Jasper sided with his parents. She ended up spending another 4 months there. Her voice shook as she described it. She looked directly at Lynette while she testified. Lynette started crying at the defense table. Her attorney tried to comfort her, but she kept sobbing. The jury watched this. They saw a woman crying for herself while her victim described months of torture. It was devastating testimony. The other 2 victims testified on Monday. Sarah went first. She'd been held in the basement 12 years ago when she was pregnant with her first child. She described the same room, the same setup, the same controlling behavior. She said the Mackenzies kept her for 5 months until she delivered. Michelle testified next. Her imprisonment happened 8 years ago and lasted 6 months. She described identical experiences, the same phrases, the same meal schedule, the same monitoring. The defense attorney tried to suggest these women were coordinating their stories. Bianca pulled out police reports showing they'd never met before the investigation. She showed evidence that their imprisonments happened years apart in different time periods. The pattern was undeniable now. 4 separate women with nearly identical stories spanning 15 years. The defense couldn't explain it away. The jury looked at the Mackenzies with clear disgust. Several jurors were taking notes constantly. One woman kept shaking her head. A man in the back row looked angry. We had them. The evidence was overwhelming, and the defense had no real answer for it. Tyler took the stand on Tuesday morning. He wore a gray suit that made him look smaller than I remembered. His lawyer had told him to dress respectfully, to show remorse. The prosecutor called him as a witness, even though he was one of the defendants. He'd agreed to testify against his parents in exchange for a reduced sentence. Bianca had explained this to me beforehand, so I wouldn't be surprised. I sat in the gallery watching him swear to tell the truth. His hand shook on the Bible. The prosecutor asked him to describe his role in what happened to me. Tyler's voice cracked when he started talking. He said his parents trained him from childhood to believe pregnant women needed constant supervision. They taught him that stress and independence were dangerous for babies. He described helping them prepare the basement room weeks before I arrived. He admitted calling my job to request medical leave without my permission. He said he knew I would resist at first, but his parents convinced him I'd understand eventually. The prosecutor asked if he believed this was right. Tyler started crying. He said he didn't know anymore, that he was raised to think this was normal and loving. He took full responsibility for his actions. He looked at me once during his testimony. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see what he'd done. The defense attorney tried to paint him as a victim of his parents during cross-examination, but Tyler kept saying he made his own choices. When he finished testifying, Bianca leaned over and whispered that his honesty would help our case significantly. The jury watched him walk back to the defense table with expressions I couldn't read. The medical experts testified on Wednesday. The first was a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma and captivity. She explained how being imprisoned during pregnancy creates specific psychological damage beyond regular trauma. She used terms like coercive control and reproductive coercion. She described how the Mackenzies' actions constituted torture under medical definitions. The jury leaned forward in their seats listening to her. She explained that pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to this type of abuse because their focus is on protecting their baby. Abusers exploit that protective instinct. The second expert was an obstetrician who reviewed my medical records and the equipment found in the basement. He testified that the monitoring equipment was hospital-grade and expensive. Someone had planned this carefully. He explained that the level of control the Mackenzies wanted was medically unnecessary and psychologically harmful. Normal prenatal care doesn't require constant supervision or isolation. The defense attorney tried to suggest the Mackenzies were just overly cautious grandparents. The obstetrician shut that down immediately. He said there's a clear line between concern and imprisonment. The jury looked angry now. Several of them were taking notes constantly. One woman kept shaking her head while the experts talked. A man in the back row had his arms crossed and his jaw tight. I could feel the mood in the courtroom shifting. The defense called their witnesses on Thursday. They brought in neighbors who said the Mackenzies were wonderful people. A woman from their church described Lynette as devoted and caring. Victor's former coworker said he was a family man who loved his grandchildren. Each witness painted them as normal, loving people who couldn't possibly do what they were accused of. But none of them had ever been to the basement. None of them knew about the pattern. Bianca's cross-examination destroyed their credibility. She asked each witness the same questions. Did you know about the basement room? No. Did you know they'd imprisoned 4 different women? No. Did you know about the camera system and the locks? No. She made it clear these character witnesses only knew the public face the Mackenzies showed the world. They didn't know what happened behind closed doors. The defense attorney tried to recover by asking about the Mackenzies' relationship with their grandchildren. The witnesses described happy family gatherings and birthday parties. Bianca objected, and the judge sustained it. The jury looked unimpressed. You could see them thinking that being nice to grandchildren doesn't excuse imprisoning their mothers. Closing arguments happened on Friday morning. The courtroom was packed. All 4 victims sat together in the front row. Bianca stood up and walked to the jury. She didn't use notes. She spoke directly to them about what this case really meant. She said it was about power and control disguised as love and concern. She said it was about vulnerable people being trapped by those who claimed to protect them. She walked them through each piece of evidence. The basement room with its locks and padding, the camera system, the medical equipment, the 4 women with identical stories spanning 15 years. She said the Mackenzies didn't make mistakes or act impulsively. They built a system designed to imprison pregnant women and take their babies. She talked about how they targeted women when they were most vulnerable. She said holding them accountable wasn't about age or family status. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Her voice got stronger as she spoke. She said the jury had the power to send a message that this would never be acceptable. The defense attorney's closing felt weak after that. He tried to argue the Mackenzies meant well. He said they were old-fashioned and misguided, but not criminals. He asked the jury to show mercy based on their age. But his words felt empty against everything we'd heard. The jury looked at him with skepticism. When both sides finished, the judge gave the jury their instructions and sent them to deliberate. 8 hours. That's how long they took. We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. I sat between Raina and Alana holding both their hands. The other 2 victims sat nearby with their support people. Ryan brought us coffee and snacks from the vending machines. Bianca checked in every hour to see how we were doing. She said 8 hours was actually a good sign. It meant they were being thorough. We didn't talk much. There wasn't anything left to say. We just waited. My back hurt from sitting in the hard chairs. The baby kicked and I put my hand on my stomach. Raina noticed and smiled at me. Around 6 p.m., Bianca's phone rang. The jury was coming back. We filed back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The Mackenzies were brought in looking exhausted. Lynette's makeup was smudged. Victor stared at the table. Tyler kept his head down. The jury walked in and nobody looked at the defense table. Bianca had told me that was usually a good sign for the prosecution. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman stood up. He was the man from the back row who'd looked so angry during the expert testimony. He said they had. The clerk took the verdict forms and handed them to the judge. The judge read them silently. Then he handed them back to the clerk to read aloud. Count 1, unlawful imprisonment. Guilty. Count 2, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Guilty. Count 3, assault. Guilty. The clerk kept reading. Guilty on every single count. All 3 defendants. Lynette made a sound like a wounded animal. She collapsed in her chair and her attorney had to hold her up. Victor just sat there staring straight ahead like he couldn't process what was happening. Tyler dropped his head into his hands. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them. He set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. The bailiffs came to take the defendants back to jail. Lynette was crying so hard they had to help her walk. Victor moved like a robot. Tyler looked back at the courtroom once before they led him through the door. I started crying the second the verdict was read. Relief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe for a moment. Raina grabbed me and hugged me tight. Alana was crying too. The other victims were hugging each other and their families. People were celebrating quietly, trying to be respectful in the courtroom. Bianca came over to us with tears in her eyes. She hugged each of us and said this was one of the most important victories of her career. She said we were incredibly brave. She said our willingness to testify had saved future victims. Ryan was there too, shaking everyone's hands. Detective Clark came over and congratulated us. He said the investigation had been difficult but worth it to see this result. We stood in that courtroom for a long time just processing what had happened. Justice felt real for the first time. They'd been held accountable, all three of them. It wasn't going to bring back the time they stole from us, but it meant something. It meant what they did was wrong, and the world agreed. Bianca called me 2 days later to explain the sentencing process. She said it would happen in 6 weeks. I'd be 9 months pregnant by then, possibly already in labor. She assured me I could submit my victim impact statement in writing if I couldn't attend. I told her I wanted to be there if possible. I wanted to look at them one more time and tell them exactly what they'd taken from me. She said she understood. We talked about what to expect at sentencing. The judge would hear statements from victims and then decide on the sentence length. With the charges they'd been convicted of, they were facing serious prison time. Lynette and Victor could get 30 years or more. Tyler would get less because of his cooperation and his age. Bianca said she'd fight for the maximum on all of them. I thanked her for everything she'd done. She said it was her job, but also her honor. She said cases like this reminded her why she became a prosecutor. 2 weeks before my due date, I woke up at 3 a.m. with contractions. I thought it was false labor at first, but they kept coming, getting stronger and closer together. I woke Raina up and she immediately started timing them. 5 minutes apart, 4 minutes, 3. She grabbed my hospital bag and helped me to the car. The drive felt like it took forever, even though the hospital was only 15 minutes away. Each contraction made me grip the door handle and breathe through the pain. Raina kept telling me I was doing great, that we were almost there. The emergency room admitted me right away. They checked my cervix and said I was already 6 centimeters dilated. This baby was coming fast. They got me into a delivery room and called my obstetrician. Raina stayed by my side holding my hand. 12 hours. That's how long labor lasted. 12 hours of pain and pushing and exhaustion. But then they put her on my chest and nothing else mattered. She was tiny and perfect with dark hair and my nose. She cried for a few seconds, then calmed down when she heard my voice. I looked at her face and promised her she'd never know the fear I'd experienced. She'd grow up safe and loved and free. I named her Hope. The nurse asked me 3 times to make sure I was certain. I was. Hope kept me going through everything in that basement. Hope got me through the trial. Hope was what I wanted her life to represent. When I told Raina the name, she started crying. She held Hope so carefully, like she might break. She whispered to her about all the things they'd do together. We spent that first night in the hospital room just staring at this perfect tiny person. She slept between us in the bassinet. Every time she made a sound, one of us would check on her. The nurses came in regularly to check our vitals and help with feeding. I was exhausted and sore, but happier than I'd been in months. This was my daughter. Mine. Nobody was going to take her from me. Nobody was going to lock us away or control us. We were free. We were safe. We were going to be okay. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after Hope's birth. I woke up that morning and fed her, changed her, dressed her in the tiny white outfit Raina had bought specifically for this day. My hands shook while I buttoned the little snaps. Bianca had called me the night before to go over what would happen. The Mackenzies would be brought in from jail. Each victim would have a chance to read their impact statement. Then the judge would decide their sentences. She reminded me I didn't have to bring Hope if it felt too hard, but I wanted to. I needed the judge to see what they'd tried to take from me. Raina drove us to the courthouse. She kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror while I sat in the back next to Hope's car seat. The baby slept the whole way there, completely peaceful. We met Alana and the other 2 victims in the hallway outside the courtroom. Everyone hugged carefully, aware of Hope sleeping against my chest in her carrier. Bianca came out to brief us one more time. She looked at Hope and smiled, then told me bringing her was powerful. It would show the judge exactly what was at stake. We filed into the courtroom and sat in the front row. The Mackenzies were let in wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. Lynette's eyes went straight to Hope. She started crying immediately. Victor stared at the floor. Tyler looked at me once, then away. The judge entered and everyone stood. He was an older man with gray hair and a serious expression. He asked if the victims were ready to present their statements. Bianca stood and said yes. I was first. I walked to the podium with Hope still in her carrier against my chest. The judge looked down at us and nodded for me to begin. I unfolded my paper but found I didn't need to read it. The words came naturally. I told him about the basement, the camera, the lock, the way they'd planned every detail to trap me. I described breaking the window and running while pregnant and bleeding. I explained how they would have taken Hope from me and convinced everyone I was crazy. I said I wanted the maximum sentence because other women deserved protection. Because this pattern had to end completely. My voice stayed steady the whole time. When I finished, the judge thanked me and I returned to my seat. Alana went next. She described 7 months in that basement, 3 pregnancies where they tried to take her again, years of thinking she was the problem. Her voice broke several times, but she kept going. The other 2 victims shared their stories. One had been held for 4 months, the other for 5. By the time everyone finished, 40 minutes had passed. The courtroom was silent except for Lynette's crying. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He said he needed a few minutes to consider the sentences. We waited. Hope woke up and I fed her right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. 15 minutes later, the judge returned. He looked directly at the Mackenzies and began speaking. He called their actions calculated, cruel, and devastating. He said he'd reviewed all the evidence and heard the victims' statements. He said he wished the law allowed him to impose longer sentences than what he was about to give. Then he sentenced Lynette to 30 years in prison, Victor to 25 years, Tyler to 12 years. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Bianca squeezed my hand. Lynette collapsed in her chair and had to be helped up by guards. Victor's face went completely blank. Tyler dropped his head into his hands. The judge explained that given their ages, Lynette was 68 and Victor was 65, they would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. Tyler would be in his late 30s when released. He said he hoped this sent a clear message that family relationships don't excuse imprisonment and abuse. The guards led them out. Lynette tried to look back at Hope one more time, but a guard blocked her view. Then they were gone. We all stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. It felt real. They were going to prison for decades. They couldn't hurt anyone else. Bianca came over and congratulated all of us. She said this was one of the most important cases of her career. Ryan hugged each victim carefully. Detective Clark, who'd been sitting in the back, came forward to shake our hands. Outside the courthouse, we stood in the sunshine. Someone suggested we get dinner together to celebrate. All 4 victims and our support people. It felt right. We went to a restaurant nearby that had a private room. They brought a high chair for Hope even though she was too small to use it. We ordered food and drinks. When everything arrived, Alana stood up with her water glass. She said she wanted to toast to survival, to strength, and to the futures we were all building. Everyone raised their glasses. Hope slept peacefully in my arms through the entire meal. We talked about next steps, moving forward, healing. 2 of the victims were planning to move to different states for fresh starts. Alana was staying here because of her kids' schools. I was staying because of Raina, and because I'd found community here. After dinner, we exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. Back at Raina's apartment, I put Hope down in her bassinet and sat on the couch. The weight of the day hit me all at once. They were going to prison. For decades. Justice had happened. Real justice. Raina sat next to me and we didn't say anything for a while. Then I told her I wanted to start looking for my own apartment nearby. I was ready to live independently with Hope. Ready to build our life. She understood. She said she'd help me search and that she wanted to be close enough to see Hope all the time. Over the next few weeks, I started making actual plans. The financial assistance I was receiving would cover rent and basic expenses while I finished my degree online. I found an apartment 3 blocks from Raina's place. It was small but perfect. 2 bedrooms, decent kitchen, safe neighborhood. I signed the lease and felt proud. Meanwhile, Alana called to tell me she'd gotten a job at a domestic violence shelter. She said she wanted to use what happened to her to help other women escape dangerous situations. She said turning her pain into purpose was helping her heal. I understood completely. I enrolled in online classes to finish my degree in social work. I'd been inspired by everyone who helped me. Bianca, Ryan, Detective Clark, my therapist, the support group. I wanted to provide that same support to others. Hope would nap while I studied. I'd read textbooks with her sleeping on my chest. It felt good to be building something, creating a future. One afternoon, Detective Clark knocked on Raina's door. He asked if he could meet Hope. I invited him in, and he held her carefully, like she might break. He told me the case had led to policy changes in how law enforcement handles reports of family imprisonment. Training programs were being developed. Protocols were being updated. Our willingness to come forward was making differences beyond just our own situations. He said other women in other places would be safer because we'd spoken up. That meant everything. A few weeks after the sentencing, I got a call from the support group leader asking if I'd speak at their next meeting. She said new members were joining who needed to hear from someone who'd made it through. I agreed immediately. On the night of the meeting, I walked into that familiar room carrying Hope in her car seat. The faces around the circle looked tired and scared, exactly how I remembered feeling months ago. I sat down and started talking. I told them about the basement, about breaking the window, about running bleeding through the dark. I told them about the trial and watching 3 people get sentenced to decades in prison. Then I lifted Hope out of her carrier and held her up. I said this was what survival looked like. This was what happened when you fought back and got out and built something new. Several women were crying. One asked how I stopped being afraid. I told her I didn't. Not completely. But I learned to live with the fear instead of letting it stop me. After the meeting, 3 different women came up to thank me. One hugged me and whispered that I gave her hope. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. An envelope arrived in my mailbox 2 days later with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from someone who signed it with just a first name. She wrote that she'd been on the jury for our case. She said serving on it changed everything she thought she understood about family violence and control. The trial showed her that abuse could look normal from the outside, that dangerous people could seem like loving parents, that victims weren't always believed even when they told the truth. She'd started volunteering with an organization that helped trafficking victims after the trial ended. She said our willingness to testify publicly inspired her to do something instead of just feeling sad about injustice. She thanked me for my courage. I read that letter 5 times. I put it in a folder with other important documents. Knowing that what happened to us created positive change in someone else's life made the pain feel less pointless. Raina and I fell into a routine that worked perfectly for both of us. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she'd come home from work and take Hope while I went to my online classes or study groups. She'd feed her, play with her, put her to bed if I wasn't back yet. At first, I felt guilty about asking for help. Then I realized Raina loved those evenings. She'd send me photos of Hope making funny faces or videos of her giggling. Our relationship changed from her taking care of me to us taking care of each other. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was my partner in building this new life. We'd sit together after Hope went to sleep and talk about our days, our plans, our fears. She told me she was proud of me for going back to the school. I told her I couldn't have done any of this without her. That was the truth. Hope turned 6 months old on a Tuesday. My therapist had warned me that milestones might trigger anxiety about everything that happened during my pregnancy. She was right. The morning of Hope's half-birthday, I woke up panicked. What if I'd somehow damaged her by being so stressed those first months? What if the trauma affected her in ways I couldn't see yet? I called my therapist and got an emergency session that afternoon. She walked me through the evidence. Hope was hitting every milestone on time. She smiled, laughed, rolled over, reached for toys. Her pediatrician said she was perfectly healthy and developing normally. The fear I felt was normal too, but it wasn't based in reality. We were safe. We were building a good life. Hope was thriving because I got us out and gave her a stable, loving home. By the end of the session, I felt calmer. I picked Hope up from Raina's place and held her close, watching her grab at my hair and babble nonsense sounds. She was fine. We were fine. 2 years passed faster than I thought possible. I finished my degree requirements and walked across the stage at graduation with Hope holding my hand. She was 2 years old and kept trying to run toward the audience where Raina and Alana were sitting. I had to scoop her up and carry her while the dean handed me my diploma. The audience laughed and clapped. Alana was crying happy tears. Raina was taking a million photos. After the ceremony, we all went out for dinner to celebrate. Hope sat in a high chair eating French fries and singing to herself. I looked around the table at these 2 women who'd helped me survive and rebuild. Alana had her own apartment now, and her kids were doing better. Raina had gotten a promotion at work. I had a degree in social work and actual job prospects. We'd all come so far from where we started. I felt proud of every single one of us. The domestic violence shelter where Alana worked called me 3 weeks after graduation. They had an opening for a case manager position. Alana had recommended me. I interviewed the next day and got hired on the spot. My first day of work, Alana showed me around and introduced me to everyone. We'd be working together directly, coordinating services for women escaping abuse. Our shared experience gave us something other staff members didn't have. We understood what it felt like to be trapped, to escape, to rebuild from nothing. The women we helped could see that understanding in us. They trusted us faster. They opened up more. Alana and I became a team that worked together smoothly. We'd strategize about difficult cases, support each other through hard days, celebrate when women got safe housing or restraining orders. Working there gave me purpose beyond just surviving. I was helping other people find their way out. Hope started preschool when she turned 3. I was terrified she'd have trouble adjusting or show signs of anxiety that came from my trauma somehow transferring to her. The first day, she walked into the classroom without looking back. Her teacher said she made friends immediately and loved every activity. No separation anxiety, no behavioral problems, no signs of anything wrong. She was confident and happy and completely normal. My therapist reminded me that I'd protected Hope from trauma by getting us out before she was born. She grew up in a safe, stable home surrounded by people who loved her. The fear I carried didn't touch her. She was her own person. untouched by what happened to me. Watching her thrive in preschool, making art projects and learning songs, I finally believed we were truly okay. 5 years after I broke that basement window, I drove back to the gas station where everything changed. The same cashier was working behind the counter. I walked in carrying Hope, who is now 5 years old and chattering about her kindergarten class. The cashier looked at me for a second, then recognition crossed her face. She came around the counter and hugged me carefully. She said she thought about me all the time and wondered if I was okay. I introduced her to Hope and told her we were doing great. I had a job helping other survivors, a home of our own, a life I'd built from nothing. She had tears in her eyes. She said she was so glad she'd been working that night, so glad she could help. I thanked her again for saving our lives. Driving home with Hope singing in the back seat, I thought about how what could have destroyed me completely had instead made me stronger. It gave me hope in every sense of the word. It led me to a purpose I never imagined. Life was beautiful and messy and complicated and completely ours. We were safe, we were happy, we were free.